Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray. This week's show is brought to you by Run Zero, which is a fabulous tool that lets you do, inventory, asset discovery, and even vulnerability scanning. And its creator, HD Moore, will be along in this week's sponsor interview to talk about a couple of things. They have been playing around with Bloodhound's Open Graph to do some cool stuff with that. And we're also going to talk to HD about what they're doing with AI, which is probably more than they're kind of shouting from the rooftops, because I think they just don't want to be those people, right? But they're doing some cool stuff there, and we'll find out about all of that after this week's news, which starts now. Adam Boileau, welcome. And the first thing we are going to talk about today is Salesforce's rough year is continuing. There has been apparently some sort of, people are couching this as describing it as a supply chain attack involving an app or a platform called Gainsight, which has resulted in Salesforce data for something like 200 organizations going walkabout. What do we know here?
So I guess to start with, Gainsight is a company that you glue into your Salesforce so that it can give you insights about your customers, and it's designed to use that data to task your sales team with doing things. So it has quite necessarily deep integration into Salesforce, deep integration into your data. It looks like somebody got hold of some access from Gainsight into those integrations. We're not 100% clear how that happened. Probably someone, got some credentials, got some access to a system at Gainsight, and then kind of pivoted onwards into their access into Salesforce customers. What's interesting here, I think, also is that Salesforce appear to be the ones that initially spotted this. So they spotted some unusual interactions with their APIs using Gainsight's access, and then went back to Gainsight and said, hey, what's going on here? Which I guess on the one hand is a good news story, right? It's just that Salesforce has kind of learnt something from the mess that has been going on for them earlier in this year. I think they initially went to Gainsight with 3 customer accounts that were being abused. As you said, it has now expanded to significantly more. So it looks like kind of a repeat of the earlier Salesforce breach, except using Gainsight's access. It looks like it's the same people, like the scattered shiny lapsus hunters, that kind of lot. And I expect we will see the same kind of, end game play out, where the companies whose data get stolen, get extorted, and, we'll see whether that makes them any money.
Yeah, so meanwhile, a spokesperson for the Shiny Hunters group, they have a spokesperson now. I wonder if it comes with dental benefits. They said that Gainsight was a customer of SalesLoft Drift. This was the earlier one that you mentioned, was a company called SalesLoft Drift, and that's how people grabbed a whole bunch of Salesforce data. We don't really precisely know what the mechanics of the breach are here, but it looks like, based on a couple of things that have come out, like one of them from Gainsight, it looks like probably the attackers were just able to steal a bunch of API keys or something like that, or creds, right? Because they've got here, Gainsight can provide the IP ranges and subnets that Salesforce login events from the Gainsight connector should originate from. At this time, these details can only be shared through a support ticket, blah, 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 blah. But that suggests to me that the way that this thing works is it's a cloud service, and you have to get an API key from your Salesforce instance, plug it into the cloud service, and then the cloud service interfaces with Salesforce, which begs the question, why wasn't this IP restricted to those ranges in the first place? If those logins are only supposed to come in from that range, why was there no restriction there? I think we need to start having these conversations and asking these questions, personally.
Yeah, we did see in the earlier breaches these crews pilfering API tokens to move laterally. So it's absolutely in their wheelhouse, as in terms of a modus operandi, a technique they're used to using. And it makes sense that, that's the kind of the avenue they went down. Whether or not the earlier breaches kind of led to the Gainsight, maybe there was some access into Gainsight with tokens stolen that then they could steal tokens to go back into Salesforce and so on and so forth. But you're right. The, kind of assembling things out of cloud components is how we build modern tooling, but it does come with a bunch of risks. And those of us that are old enough to remember when, perimeters existed and networks were restricted and you had to be in a certain place and where you came from was an auth factor, do rather end up feeling like, surely grandpa's controls here would have prevented this kind of abuse. But, That's kind of not the world we live in anymore, even though there is something to be said for grandpa's IP restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny old world. Let's just say that. But I think Salesforce did well to detect this, right? Yeah. Because if it is a detection based on a bunch of unusual logins from the wrong IP ranges kind of thing, and like actually detecting that when you're operating at the scale that Salesforce is like kind of commendable, right? And they have to get on this because they've been just dragged all year.
Yeah, exactly right. In the end, it's their logo and name that is at the top of this story, even if it wasn't directly their fault. Like even if it was, some customer application and their customers, etc. Like it's still their name. And I think good on them for having spotted this proactively enough to kind of get onto it early. But in the end, did it make much difference? I don't know. I mean, they're still there with their name, as you say, being dragged through the mud.
Yeah, so what we do know is that Google has said that something like 200 customers of this platform have had their Salesforce data walked. But we also know that the lapsus shiny hunters, or whatever you want to call them, have made some claims here that are being denied. They're claiming to have breached a whole bunch of different companies. Like one of the companies that they claim to have breached was Crowdstrike. So they said that as a result of this, they were able to breach Crowdstrike and whatever, and they used a few screenshots to kind of make that claim. We've seen them do, the comm kids kind of do this before in the case of Okta, where they managed to get onto some like third-party service agent's desktop and get a couple of screenshots of, an Okta support panel, and that was all that they managed to do, and then they claimed that they'd breached Okta. But, in this case, it looks like there was someone on the inside actually taking some of these screenshots, and they have now been fired. So it was interesting seeing Crowdstrike getting dragged for this, because honestly, that's a good result, right? Like if you've got someone in there doing the wrong thing, detecting them and firing them seems like a win to me, actually. No organization the size of Crowdstrike is going to be able to completely exclude a malicious insider, right? Like it's not realistic to expect to screen them out. So being able to detect them and give them the heave-ho, that's a good thing. That's a win.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, hiring people is difficult, and background checking people, trying to, figure out who you can trust is really, really difficult. And, as an organization, especially one that's hiring, young technical kids, you often do just want to give them a chance. I know, like when we were hiring at Insomnia, we are hiring, by and large, punk hacker kids, right? And you have to give them a degree of trust that, hey, even if you have done some shady things in the past, or you have done some things that, a normal corpo background check might even pick up and flag on, at the same time, you're saying, hey, we're giving you an opportunity, a legit job. It's going to make, more money than you were making doing dumb hacking stuff. Come on board, take the win. Let's, move on with your life. And, 99% of them take that and do the right thing. And, sometimes you lose some. And as you say, spotting it, reacting to it, that's the best you can do.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Crowdstrike's hiring policies are a little bit different to your hiring policies when you were running a small pen test firm in New Zealand. Yeah, but sure, when you were prepared to roll the dice. Like, I mean, anyone who admits to anything dodgy, they ain't getting a job at a major EDR vendor. It's not happening.
Sometimes you like to give these kids a chance, They're good. They're good people mostly.
Speaking of insiders too, I want to follow something up. A couple of weeks ago, a week or two ago, we spoke about this thing that happened at Intel where someone tried to sneak data out on a USB device, and then that didn't work, so they spun up a NAS and were able to get the device out on the NAS. And I made the point at the time, well, they still got caught, right? But we sort of used that as a way to kick the DLP companies. I've since found out it was actually the DLP companies who caught it because they detected the attempted USB exfiltration as suspicious, and then the product just went screenshot crazy, and that's how they caught the guy. So, interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how these things work out. And I guess, in that case, good job, DLP, snapping someone, mounting up their NAS and copping stuff around. So,
whatever we with screenshots too, like, and I'm sorry, but, we say it for attackers, we've got to say it for defenders as well. It ain't dumb if it works.
Yeah, and I guess it did that time. So, good job.
Now, moving on, we've actually got a write-up to cover from It's Positive Technologies, right? The Russia-based, big consultancy, which is, very competent, but does a lot of stuff for the Russian state. And we're not big fans of the actions of the Russian state these days. But what's funny here is we've got a pretty detailed write-up about a Chinese APT crew called, APT 31. This is a group that has been, I think, indicted in absentia by the US Department of Justice. So they're like a well-known APT group. They do a lot of economic espionage, intellectual property theft, that sort of thing. And Russians have done a big write-up on the Chinese hacking them. With friends like China, who needs enemies?
Yeah, exactly. I always like reading write-ups like this from other countries, because you do get a slightly different perspective. There's a slightly different flavor, like the culture of how much you share or what you say is a little bit different than what you might get out of Western firms. So they're always a fun read. This crew, the APT31, I think is the I think it's been attributed to the Wuhan branch of the Chinese Ministry of State Security. So, they're pretty serious business hackers. And it's just a great write-up, bunch of great details. They're using kind of tradecraft that you would expect. One thing I did quite enjoy in their tradecraft is they're using the old Microsoft dev tunnels, where like Visual Studio came with this feature a couple of years back where you could just like tunnel stuff out of your network into Microsoft, and then Microsoft would kind of port forward it back to you. So you could have a Microsoft certificate, Microsoft address space listener that would terminate on a local service on your machine, and they were using that for backdoor access. So it's a great way to get around network controls. And Red Team has used it, so it's always fun to see that stuff trickling down into APT crews. But yeah, overall, it's just a great write-up, and it's a good reminder that there are competent people everywhere, and, just reading the stuff that's in English, sometimes you do miss out on things.
I mean, I'm so, you got to make a no limits partnership crack here. Russia and China have a no limits partnership. I guess that includes, the limits placed on each other by their various security controls. But, fun stuff. Look, staying with the Chinese as well, we had an interesting thing hit the news cycle here, which was there's a bigwig from the Chinese Communist Party visiting Australia at the moment as part of some huge 100-strong delegation. And as part of that, I think he's meeting the Prime Minister. It's a pretty big deal, state visit, and the Australian Parliament House, security team put out this memo, not to be forwarded on to anyone, of course, and subsequently, of course, it leaked. But this memo basically said, hey, we've got a Chinese delegation coming through Parliament House. At various points, the Wi-Fi ain't going to work because we're turning it off. You should update all of your devices to lockdown mode, turn off Wi-Fi, turn off Bluetooth. This, I don't know how to feel about this, right? Because on one level, I think, do they know something here? Does China try to slip in a couple of MSS guys holding, super advanced Chinese equivalents to, the Hack 5 hacking pineapple? Or is this just like, the juice jacking thing or don't use public Wi-Fi advice? I sort of can't figure it out, to be honest, if this is based on actionable advice. What did you make of this?
I mean, my initial initial feeling was kind of the same thing, which is like, this feels like scaremongering. Oh my God, there's Chinamen in our midst. Quick, everybody close the curtains and, turn off Bluetooth.
Set fire to your laptop. Eat your phone. The Chinese are coming.
Yeah, exactly. When all of the laptops were made in Shenzhen to start with. But so like that was my initial feeling. But then, you do start to wonder, like, I wonder if there is something actionable. Like, is there some proximity thing? Because there have absolutely been proximity-based attacks, against these platforms. I mean, I'm always reminded of Mark Dowd's Apple AirDrop, like CPAO path traversal, bugs. So like there are proximity bugs. It would be kind of a bold move to do it while you're there in an official delegation.
But China does bold moves. You know what I mean?
Well, so they do.
And that's why I'm conflicted about this, because I'm like, it's ridiculous to assume that, there would be someone malicious as part of this delegation here for a friendly visit. And then you're like, oh, actually, no, probably not.
Why? On the other hand, why not? I guess for comparison, the same delegation came through New Zealand before it went to Australia, and this guy's like third in charge in China. Like he's head of their the equivalent of the parliament. So like not quite Speaker of the House, kind of higher up, but still like third in line if something bad happens in China. But yeah, they came through New Zealand, and I didn't see any news articles about our parliament turning off Bluetooth. So perhaps the New Zealand stuff is just absolutely impregnable, and it's the Australians being worrying about things that we've got totally sorted, or maybe we didn't get the actionable advice. Who knows? But yeah, either way, it's an interesting story, and it does make you wonder.
It does, yeah. So it was Zhao Liji, I think, is the pronunciation there. And he's the chair of the National People's Congress of China. So, yeah, visiting Parliament. And look, I think one thing about this story, too, is I don't think the Chinese are going to appreciate these news stories very much. I mean, at one point, like Australia's relationship with China deteriorated to the point that China issued its 10 demands. I think it was 10. They had a demand list of things that Australia needed to do to improve relations, and one of them was to stop getting the press to be critical of China, which we had to explain to them that's not really how it works here. But they hate stuff like this, and in particular, they hate anything where they're being singled out. I think Dmitry Alperovich on his Geopolitics Decanted podcast had a great interview. He was talking about the podcast was about tariffs and trade negotiations with China, and at one point, the Chinese were going apoplectic about some Trump-introduced trade measure because they were complaining about being singled out. And as soon as they found out, no, this applies to everybody, they were like, oh, cool, yeah, no problem. So when they feel like they're being singled out, it's a huge problem. So I sort of feel like, we've got some pretty strong comments from the opposition party here in Australia in this piece from The Guardian. And I feel like, well, if they leaked this to sort of score some points here, I don't think that was in the national interest. Is it in the public interest in terms of should the public, know about this sort of stuff? I think absolutely. But does this undercut the country in other ways? I kind of feel like it does. So I don't know if there's going to be any sort of flow on effects from this. We'll just have to wait and see. And, if anyone knows why they did that, email us, let us know. Meanwhile, Shai-Hulud is back. This is the NPM worm that was gave us the warm and fuzzies earlier this year. Someone's had a second go of it. There's apparently 500 packages affected. What does the worm actually do in this iteration, Adam?
So much the same as it did last time, with some refinements. Essentially it infects developers through backdoored JavaScript packages, rummages around, steals their GitHub tokens, steals their NPM tokens, publishes updated packages that are backdoored as well. So it kind of propagates via NPM. Every time a developer with publishing rights gets compromised, then it adds itself. It also uses GitHub Actions to set up a backdoor in the environment that it's running in, which I think is one of the newer features. And it steals all the secrets. It uses Trufflehog to rummage around, steal all the creds it can find, and just straight up publishes them in a new GitHub repo in that account. So you can rummage around on GitHub and help yourself to credentials. The backdoor component is new, and that's quite fun because the GitHub action it uses hooks on GitHub discussions, so you can post a message in the discussion forum feature of a repository, and it straight up takes the body of that discussion and passes it to a shell to exec on the machine that it's backdoored. So it's a great public internet to command exec in all the places that this thing has ever run. So that's pretty fun. But yeah, it went a little bigger, I think, than the previous one. It was a bit more aggressive. GitHub is changing, NPM, is changing a bit about how auth for publishing packages works. So I think maybe the people who write this felt like they better, if they want to do it again, they better do it now before NPM ruins their party. But yeah, it's been spreading pretty big, gotten some quite big name packages, but it's also pretty noisy. One of the things it also does is it will delete all of your files if it can't find credentials that are useful to it. So it punishes you for not having your credentials. So it's kind of nice.
For not having a passwords, no passwords.txt.
Yes. Yeah,
RMRF.
Yeah, exactly. It punishes you. So yeah, I don't know who's behind it. There's a couple of bugs in it that's making it not quite as effective as it could be. And because it's so noisy, it's being shut down pretty quick in terms of how it propagates. But still, I do love a good internet mess, and it's making a mess.
Well, how is NPM going to get, how are they going to get on top of this? Really?
So,
is this just going to keep happening, or they are actually going to get on top
So
of
they have proposed some changes in the workflows for publishing packages to try and require, live human proof of presence. So you can't automate everything quite so much, which, has some downsides, obviously, but clearly, having worms propagate through your package is not ideal. And just because the JavaScript ecosystem is so fluid in terms of how often it pulls upstream dependencies, this is a thing that, you do want a human in the loop somewhere. You don't want this just, going full auto crazy.
I think I remember
generally. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke about this when they were first talking about those sort of controls, and like it's a good idea, but it's only going to slow it down, I feel like,
Well, yeah, I mean, the supply, like the nature of the JavaScript ecosystem just kind of lends itself to these kinds of, supply chain attacks. So yeah, we're going to see more of them. And like, honestly, it's just, it's kind of fun to talk about. I'm glad I'm not a JavaScript dev though.
Yeah, it's a good time for us.
It's a good time for us.
Basically. Now, this is something that has been coming for a while. We've covered it in Risky Bulletin. I don't know that we've talked about it on the main show, but the FCC in the United States has eliminated these minimum security requirements for telcos that were sort of introduced, I think, in the wake of Salt Typhoon, or they may have even predated that. But the idea was that the FCC had sort of interpreted various bits of, like, I think the Kalia Act to say, well, according to this act, you need to hit this bar and make your systems this secure. Trump admins rolled it back, basically. Brendan Carr, who heads the FCC, is the chairman there. He voted with one of his colleagues, which is Olivia Trusty. There you go. While the Democratic Commissioner, Ana Gomez, voted against this. So it looks like telcos are kind of off the hook, right? I mean, the telcos had some legitimate complaints, in my view, right? Which is, hey, this is going to be really difficult and expensive, and it's going to cost us a bunch of money, which is, of course, what they're going to say. But it's all academic now because it's done. Those requirements are not going onto the telcos. What do you make of this, right? Because is getting telcos to spend billions of dollars to try to update their core networks to a more secure state, is that what's going to win us anything here? Or, do we need to be thinking more about how to use over-the-top modern services to mitigate most of the risks from groups like Salt Typhoon?
I mean, I think having some minimum requirements for telcos, I thought was a good idea. And these are pretty low bar minimum stuff. Like claiming this is going to require billions of dollars worth of work, I feel is a bit disingenuous. Some of these things are like, change the default passwords, right? They're not things that are surprising to anyone or are specifically, are telco specific. They are things that you as a customer of a telco would kind of expect them to be already doing. And in that respect, I feel like letting telcos off the hook isn't a great plan. As you say, like telcos are less important than they used to be, because of over-the-top crypto, because, we tend to use, say, Signal.
Well,
WhatsApp,
hang on.
SMS.
Let me just stop you there. I mean, I would rephrase that and say that telcos should be less important these days. But as we saw through the Salt Typhoon stuff and how much the Chinese got out of that, clearly they still are very important in terms of figuring out who's talking to who and this and that. So, unless you really change policy and pivot towards using apps that regard the telcos as threats, just as a matter of policy, like they are a problem, right? If you're an attacker, in a US telco trying to figure out who FBI agents are talking to, I mean, chances are they're using phones, they're using text messages and whatever. I guess what I'm asking is like, can we reasonably expect that a minimum baseline is going to be able to stop foreign adversaries from being able to do that? And I just don't think it will. It might make it a bit harder, but I think the solution here is going to be moving towards, over-the-top stuff and doing a lot of education, both internally at places like FBI and then externally as well, which is, hey, if you want to talk to us, maybe don't text message us or maybe don't ring the number, maybe you want to use a payphone or send us an email, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think defending telcos against nation states, right, is kind of a bar that regulation is never going to meet, right? If your adversary is Chinese MSS or Russian FSB, then a telco is always going to be fair game for them because they'll find a way. But that doesn't mean that we should let the telcos off the hook completely, I suppose. In this week's Between Two Nerds conversation, Gruck and Tom were kind of comparing the lack of regulation for cloud services, like infrastructure providers like Amazon and so on, to telcos, and saying do we feel like we can trust cloud providers to do a good job of this? And like someone like Google or someone like Amazon EC2, like they do a good job. Amazon AWS, like they do a good job because it's in their DNA to build robust systems that are resilient against all kinds of threats. Like security is super important. Telcos don't really have that kind of cultural background of caring about security. And so regulation for them maybe is more appropriate. And I think maybe it was Gruck made the point that if you're an engineer inside a telco, having regulatory requirements to point at and justify why you need to be in the way, why you need to slow things down, why you need to, kind of be an impediment is actually pretty useful. And having done a bunch of work in telcos in my time, I found, like being able to point to external requirements was useful for justifying things. And in that respect, I feel like letting them go is a loss. But on the other hand, Chinese MSA is always going to be up in your telcos. So what can you do?
What can you do? Oh, well, on to the next story. That's what you can do. The remaining parts of the SEC lawsuit against Solarwinds has been tossed. This was a lawsuit that the SEC filed in 2023. It was an interesting one. We covered it at the time because basically one of the big parts of the lawsuit was, hey, you've been putting all of these security statements on your website and into your SEC filings where we've looked at your internal chats and your security people are freaking out about all of the deficiencies in your security, so therefore you are lying to the market. Bits and pieces of that have just been getting tossed over the subsequent years, and the last of it's gone. So I don't know whether this sends a message that people maybe need to be a little bit more careful in their statements. Like, having had a couple of years to think about it, I think even if charges were proven and there was some sort of ruling and whatever, if the lawsuit succeeded, I think the end result of that is you're just going to wind up with a different type of weaselly boilerplate language going into SEC filings instead of the generic stuff we got now. It'll be a slightly more hedged generic language, and I don't know that really changes much.
Yeah, I think in the end, weasels are going to weasel, and this particular lawsuit, in some respects, I quite liked it because I do like seeing weasels get some comeuppance because I've been involved in many weasels over the years. But as you say, I don't think it was going to make much difference in the big picture, and maybe it's time we let Solarwinds go and they can continue on with their life and we can all just move on from this ugly episode. Right. People will continue to weasel regardless.
It's time to find someone new. It's been 5 years.
Yes.
Basically. Now someone in Australia really annoyed some people because a world record DDoS attack hit a single endpoint in Australia. It was a 15.72 terabit per second DDoS targeting some Azure endpoint here in Oz.
Yeah, and apparently Microsoft just kind of weathered it, which, I guess good for them. Good job on the network engineering team, all the people involved in, pushing that many packets. It was, 3.64 billion packets a second, they said. That's a lot of packets. So, good work taking it. It looked like it came from one of these, compromised home routers and cameras botnets because, there's people's domestic internet is so big these days that, chucking 15 terabits a second at a target is totally a thing you can do with, a few thousand compromised IP cameras and routers and things. So that's kind of terrifying in a way. But, I guess it's kind of amazing the internet works, given that you can throw that many packets around and people do, and yet things basically still fine. It wouldn't have been that long ago that, the entire place would have been at its knees at that many packets per second.
Yeah, I'm amazed. We have the links to this country to support that sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
Feels like a good news story, doesn't it?
It does. And Krebs has got an interesting kind of think piece here. There was a intermittent outage. What was that last week? I think it was before. Yeah, it was before we recorded last week's show. We didn't cover it though because it was just an outage, which was Cloudflare went down for a bit and was flapping around and having a hard time. And some people had to spin up, some sort of alternative hack together CDN or whatever. And some people just removed CDN protection so that they could be online. And, Brian's got this story here, which makes the point that, hey, Cloudflare isn't just about availability. It's also your WAF. And people have been very lazy about stuff like SQL injection because they're using Cloudflare and just relying on Cloudflare to mop that stuff up when people try it. So basically the thinking is, a strategy for attackers might be to just wait until Cloudflare has an outage again and, monitor for DNS changes on targets and whatever. And then you're going to have an easy time going at them. I don't know. Sure. What did you think of this?
So I felt the bit about the WAF being missing is a thing that ideally people shouldn't be relying on. And I guess, like in my professional, previous professional career, we did some shootouts between various WAF products, including like comparing Cloudflare with various other CDNs, on-premise WAFs. And the thing that is worth remembering about Cloudflare is Cloudflare does an amazing job, but they also only have, a couple of 100 milliseconds worth time to make a call on every request. And so you're going to get at most, 80, 90 milliseconds worth of CPU time spent deciding whether a request is malicious, and any attacker that can exceed that threshold is probably just going to get let straight through. So like the amount of WAF you can get from something at Cloudflare scale and the amount you're paying for that WAF, you're kind of getting what you pay for. So that's one thing to remember. The thing I liked about this particular Krebs piece, though, was anytime you have a big outage like this and people have to make ad hoc changes to your infrastructure to stay alive, it's really important that you've got a process afterwards to say, okay, what did we change? What ad hoc stuff got created? How did we solve those problems? And did we do so in a way that, maintained our security posture? Did we spin stuff up with personal devices? Did we use, accounts that were outside of regular? What shadow IT got created, which will then get forgotten about and left to bit rot and then compromised, 3 years from now or something. So that part I thought was really good call out. The kind of like, our attacker's going to wait for Cloudflare to go down and then pounce like that, I didn't find particularly compelling.
No, and it's funny what you say, right? Because you just triggered a memory for me, which is nearly 20 years ago when I founded this podcast, one of the early sponsors was Checkpoint, but in Australia. So obviously the audience early on skewed very heavily towards Australia. And the reason Checkpoint sponsored Baby Risky Biz, new podcast, was so that they could have someone come onto the show every month or two and just beg their customers to go and find and allow any firewall rules from their checkpoints because of exactly what you say, which is something breaks. They throw an allow any into their firewall and then, okay, everything works again and they just leave it there. And this was such a problem that they were literally sponsoring the podcast so that they could beg their customers to like roll them back. So yeah, it's a thing. And it's still a problem. Although now it's totally Cloudflare and not your Checkpoint firewalls.
Yes,
that's how it goes. Now, let's have a chat about Copilot Actions in Windows, where Microsoft has got some new experimental AI agent shipping with like a Windows beta that you can turn on. But what's really funny is they're shipping it and just saying, hey, this is like super experimental. And unless you're like a super duper power user, like don't turn this on. And we don't really know what's going to happen here. So they're just hedging the absolute crap here out of this release. And I think quite rightly, people are pointing at this. People in security are pointing at this and saying, oh my God, this is going to be a problem in the future. Now, a couple of things. Yeah, probably. I would agree with that it's going to be a problem in the future, but complaining about it ain't going to help, because I have a feeling that in 3-4 years from now, like even sooner, the job of security people is going to be dealing with stuff like this. Companies, they want the productivity gains that come with AI. They're going to demand it. They don't care that you shouldn't mix code and data. They don't care. That's all foreign gobbledygook. Your job now as a security professional is to help organizations do this in a way that doesn't get you immediately like digitally murdered, basically.
Yeah, and we're going to solve the halting problem while we're at it. Because it's just the idea of hooking up an LLM to be able to just like randomly do stuff with your Windows. It sounds terrifying, and you are correct in that they are just going to do it anyway. I think the Microsoft caveat was only turn this on, quote, if you understand the security implications outlined, which
nobody
does, right? Nobody knows what's going to go on. I don't know, it's terrifying. And at the same time, as a hacker, as someone that covers security, as someone that likes breaking stuff, like this is it's wonderful. We're going to be, future hackers are just going to be like convincing Windows to give you a shell, convincing Windows to, do whatever you want to do, by asking nicely. Like no more do we have to think about, memory corruption or, security boundaries or, like complicated things that require, semantic execution or whatever else. Like, no, we just ask nicely now. We just give a, convincing, like everything becomes social engineering, which like, what a world, man. What a world.
It is. I mean, I think we're going to be able to deal with a lot of the basic stuff, right? Like, I think I'm pretty bullish on our ability to deal with like very basic prompt injection and whatnot. But you're right that we can't fundamentally, from a first principles sense, solve this problem. Now, look, as regular listeners would know, these days, risky business, and maybe in particular, like we work very closely with a VC fund. I work very closely with Decibel and some of its portfolio companies. And what's amazing about that is you really get a sense for the sort of technology that's being funded and where all of this is going. And I can tell you absolutely, we're going to be dealing with like AI on endpoints. Like it's happening because when you see, you just look through a pitch deck of what people are saying they can do with AI agents on desktops. And it's amazing from a productivity perspective. It's amazing from a like organizational efficiency perspective. And you get some real security gains, like just really powerful, sophisticated stuff. So it's coming. Like it is absolutely coming. Should it be turned on by default in experimental mode on every Windows endpoint ever? Probably not, but it is. I guess that's I've said it a bunch of times. It's happening. Meanwhile, the VX Underground folks had a bit of a poke at this beta feature in Windows and did a little write up on X, which I found quite funny actually.
Yeah, so they dug through the implementation of this thing, and interestingly enough, it's actually not so much client-side, right? There is actually a lot of heavy lift talking back to Microsoft servers. They make the good point that if you want to turn this off, you can just like remove the DNS entry or make a fake DNS entry in your hosts file for the particular endpoint it uses off in Azure. But yeah, the idea that your local machine is doing all of this AI stuff and then plumbing it off to Microsoft, and that somewhere in Microsoft there was like a real-time, potentially a real-time feed of like, once this thing is deployed at scale, like every Windows user on the planet, everything that they're doing, that they're interacting with the AI, going through, some endpoint of Microsoft, which, like, man, there must be some ways to monetize that, but also how much is that going to cost them? Jesus. So yeah, let's,
yeah,
when you pull apart these things, it does start to look, a little bit, equal parts panopticon terrifying, and also you can see why Nvidia's stock price is so high.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of this, for the bull case, I guess, is that they start shipping a bunch of these features, they become really useful, and then when the companies eventually turn around and say that'll be $50 a month per seat, you can't imagine not paying, right?
Yeah.
So we're a little ways away from figuring out whether that's actually what's going to happen, but let's see. Now, from talking about the problems of tomorrow to talking about the problems of 20 years ago that are still problems today, Adam, we actually spoke about that 40 web, what was it? Like, was it like a .. slash, like, bad URL command execution bug? We spoke about that last week. Of course, it is now being exploited in the wild, and I believe there's a Metasploit module for it now. So hooray, you too, dear listener, can just go out and exploit this one easily.
Yes, this one is definitely being attacked in the wild. It's on the SysAkev list. We hadn't seen, so it was actually a two-part bug. There was a path traversal that led to like auth bypass, and then, or let you kind of create accounts, auth bypass. And then there was a second one that you could do arbitrary command execution as root on the underlying device, and those two have been chained together. Last week, we hadn't seen a POC for the second half of that. Now, both of these have been checked into a Metasploit module. And the funny thing is, in the sort of irony sense, the command injection part of it is you inject into the file name of a SAML user. So you log into the command line interface of your Fortinet, and you set up a user to auth via SAML, and then the file name gets processed by some kind of underlying command line. You can shell meta character inject into that. And it's just kind of, it's funny that it's in setting up federated authentication. You get code exec as root. So like it's yesterday's, grandpa's bug, but with today's, federated authentication technology. So by our powers combined. Good job.
Yes.
Fortinet.
Now, meanwhile, two suspected scattered spider kids have pleaded not guilty over the Transport for London cyber attack. This is a piece here from Alexander Martin talking about that one. We'd already reported, I think, on the arrests of these two guys, Talia Joubert and Owen Flowers, aged 19 and 18, respectively. And yeah, they've thrown in the not guilty pleas. And you read this story and you think one of the things like they're pleaded not guilty to is like failing to hand over their passwords to or passphrases to various various encrypted devices. And you think that seems an odd thing to plead not guilty to, because you would think that that would be a fairly straightforward charge. I think your note in our weekly planning document on this story was, well, yeah, good luck with that, guys. I think by the time it gets to this point and you've had National Crime Agency task forces and stuff all over you, they've got all of your, your data on drives and whatever. I don't know. I don't think it's going to go their way, but of course I'm not super familiar with the case. But the vibes here don't feel good for them.
The vibes really don't feel good. And although they were allegedly behind the Transport for London thing, any sentencing or any kind of trial process and sentencing, assuming they're found guilty, is absolutely also going to be thinking about, look at the mess Jaguar Land Rover, it's just, this is a big thing in Britain. And those kids not going to go well.
No, it's not. Speaking of someone else who's up on charges, another one from the Record, Darina Antoniuk over there has a report about this 21-year-old guy who's been arrested in Moscow on treason charges. And some people in the Russian media are saying this is because he was smack-talking that messenger app, Max, which is Russia's answer to WeChat. So they're trying to corral everyone onto a surveillance-friendly, state-controlled app. And he's like, yeah, this is a piece of crap and there's all these bugs in it and blah, 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 blah. So it seems like he didn't mind sort of poking the Russian establishment in the eye, and that's possibly what's gone wrong with him. But of course, this is the issue with Russia. We don't know. I mean, maybe he was doing something treasonous. You would never know. It's all going to go into a closed court, and God knows what's going to happen to him.
Yeah. I mean, he, at the very least, he called Max, quote, a disgusting product, unquote, on his Telegram. So that's, not going to make you friends in Russia. But yeah, as to what's going to happen to him, I mean, he may end up in the, severe penal colony alongside the Group IB guy, or he may end up, working for the Russian establishment, in the cyber world, or he might just get sent to the front. You just don't know in Russia, what's going to happen, and the lack of kind of transparency. And maybe that's maybe if you speak Russian, there is more transparency to be found there. Obviously we see these things through Google Translate, etc. But yeah, who knows what's going to happen to the guy? But it doesn't feel like a good time to be someone doing, maybe even good faith security research in Russia, No,
unless you are working for one of the companies that the state smiles on, Positive, right? If you're working there, you should be okay. But crazy stuff.
Just don't say mean things about Max.
No, that's right. Don't say mean things about the Russian state generally. Max, the military, Vladimir Putin, you know what I mean? You just got to know what you can say and what you can not say. We got something I just wanted to mention this week. You found this one. This is a piece from Tim Starks over at Cyberscoop. A bunch of cybersecurity professionals have gotten together and signed a letter asking everyone to end so-called hack law, right? LORE. So this is the idea that we keep putting out this advice. Well, not but the cybersecurity advice du jour is still don't use public Wi-Fi, and juice jacking is a big threat and whatever. So they've got together and signed a letter saying, please, God, let's stop this. And also put out a list of recommended advice, which is actually sensible, which is stuff like, you should patch your stuff and use a password manager and multi-factor authentication. So I think this is a really good idea. A whole bunch of sort of senior cybersecurity executives have signed on to this. Bob Lord has something to do with this as well. And, it just seems like a great idea. And it's a very handy resource that you can actually point people towards. Because, you're like me, I imagine, in that people frequently ask you, what can I do to be more secure? Yeah. And, this is just something you can point those people towards. And I hope they keep building this out.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great project. And, I thought I wanted to put it in the run sheet this week because, so many people, so many listeners are, going home for, Thanksgiving in the US or, the festive season coming up. You're going to be giving family IT advice and having something to point people to when they're like, should I get a VPN? NordVPN sounds really good on YouTube. You can point to something that says, actually, VPN doesn't do anything for you. Just use a password manager, just change, use multi-factor, that would be a good start. So it's nice to have something to point to, and something that they can kind of go and read on their own time so that you don't have to, fix their internet, whilst you're at home, trying to eat Thanksgiving turkey or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I hate listening to a podcast where the podcast is good and the host is saying smart things and it's really cool. And then the next thing they're reading an advert for NordVPN, just kill me. It's so bad. I never wanted to do that. People are like, oh, why is your sponsorship model the way it is? Why do you think? It's we do not want to do that. We're never going to do that. Never. And okay, so we got our comedy story for the end of the show. This had me dying. The International Association of Cryptologic Research, Adam, ran a very cryptographically secure election for some position within the organization. They had to abandon the election because, drum roll please,
one of the people involved in this process lost their key material. So they were supposed to have 3 people with a third of the key material each, and then by their powers combined, they could get the results back in a cryptographically good way. And yes, one of the 3 lost his key mat. And so they've had to annul the whole thing, and they're going to have to rerun a whole other election, which, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It's a thing of joy to see that everybody struggles with the real hard part of crypto, which is not the algorithms, it's not the key exchange primitives, it's not all of those things. It's where did we put the damn key?
Where's my YubiKey? I thought I left it over here. I thought it was in this drawer. It's basically that, but this is the International Association of Cryptologic Research. It's just so good. And the person who lost their key mat has actually resigned their position, which I think is really funny. It's like you get drummed out of those circles for losing your key.
Yeah, right? It's the guy actually his name's Moti Young. He actually have a book by him on my shelf. Did some amazing research on early crypto virology and stuff. So he's a legit guy, but it can happen to anyone. Right, dog eats your YubiKey. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, mate, that is actually it for the week's news. Big thanks for that. It's great to chat to you as always. We'll do it all again next week.
Yeah, we certainly will, Pat. I'll see you then.
That was Adam Boileau there with a check of the week's security news. Big thanks to him for that. It is time for this week's sponsor interview now with industry legend H.D. Moore. He, of course, created Metasploit 1 million years ago, but these days he runs RunZero. And RunZero is a, asset discovery platform, which can also measure risk exposures as well, right? So you can point it at your organization and you can know, hey, wow, we got some really risky stuff hanging out on the perimeter here. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening internally that we didn't know about, what's this network over here? It's a fantastic tool. It works both as a network scanner and as a data cruncher. You can feed it data from other tools. You can give it API access into your cloud environment. It's extremely cool stuff. Now, one of the things HD's been playing with lately, and the team at RunZero, is something that we spoke about on the show in a sponsored segment with Bloodhound, with SpectreOps, who make Bloodhound. They introduced the ability to take their attack path mapping technology and they've made it more open, so you can start creating your own extensions, to Bloodhound. So it's not just looking at Windows credentials and things like that and finding attack paths through Active Directory. So HD joined me to talk about what they were doing, what they've been doing with Bloodhound's Open Graph. And I also quizzed him on what they're doing around AI, because RunZero, being a primary source of data, is a fantastic tool to start throwing some AI at. And it makes a lot of sense for them, for example, to have a MCP server for other products and tools to use and agents to use. That's basically the interview with HD Moore that I did last week or the week before. Please enjoy.
So in RunZero, we've got graphs in the product already. We do layer 2 topology, layer 3 bridges, segmentation graphs, route path tracing. But we're curious, what would happen if you then extended this to more than just network assets? And so the obvious choice to play with this was to go with Bloodhound and say, let's go build an open graph connector for RunZero to bring RunZero data into Bloodhound itself. And then let's try overlapping the nodes within RunZero with the nodes that are in the Bloodhound Active Directory and kind of figure out, can you chain things together? So the hard part of this is oftentimes when you see a graph, it's what do they call it, an executive distraction machine. It actually doesn't do anything usable, doesn't tell anything new. And so I was really kind of hitting my head against the wall trying to figure out what is the value of a graph when you can get the same data with just a linear query, right? What does the graph tell you that it doesn't? And so where we landed is anytime there is a relationship between two assets that define the security relationship, that's really important for a graph and not something you can easily do outside of a graph itself. So, when you think about it from the network side, one example we came up with that I thought was really hit the nail on the head is there any network segment that has both an iPhone in it and a Cisco router with default SNMP configuration? By definition, you don't need to know which network is BOID. You find them by the presence of a BOID device. And in the same segment, is there a misconfigured core infrastructure device exposed directly to it? And there you go. You've got either, a wireless guest segment or whatnot. Without having to know anything at all about which ones are wireless, how it's configured, you found a pretty big significant configuration flaw just by looking for any connectivity between a BYOD device and an insecure infrastructure device.
But I mean, do you need a graph to do that sort of query? I mean, I would have thought that you could just sort of query a run zero like inventory data set and find that anyway, right?
Sure, you could do it. So if you happen to start off with, here's my wireless network, now let's go find all the insecure infrastructure, that would be great. I mean, that would get to the same answer. The question is, did you know which of your networks were guest networks to start with? So if you're going to a network with zero knowledge, and the only thing you can really do to tell you what's what is to look at the relationship between two nodes, that's one way to get there. And that's where I really found it to be useful. It's like, did I find any segment of my network that has an AS400 and also has a Windows XP machine? Do I have any network that has, a HMI, but also has a consumer device in the same segment, like an IP camera for high-K vision or whatnot? So it's those type of relationships that I think that are really interesting that you can do with the graph that are really difficult to do outside of it.
Yeah, right. So how fancy did you go with it, right? Because these seem like fairly basic use cases. Did you go through the whole step through, attack path kind of thing with OpenGraph?
Yeah, we took a different approach of we open sourced everything. So all the code that effectively you take an export from run zero, whether it's the free version or paid or whatnot, and then you run this Go code on it. It produces a Open Graph file, which is nodes and edges and all the information linking together. You import that into Bloodhound, either the free version or your paid enterprise version, and then you can do your Cypher queries to show how it all chains together. So I look at this as a way to prototype stuff that we want to build in run zero natively. Let's go play with it within Bloodhound first, and then take the parts back that make the most sense into the product, just like Bloodhound and SpecDrops is doing the same thing with Open Graph and their enterprise product. So it's kind of a neat kind of community prototype land with Open Graph. And all you really have to do is put together nodes and edges and lay them out a certain way and then be able to create a query to check the relationships. Something similar that we do within run zero today is we look for every TLS fingerprint behind the firewall, and then we look at the whole internet and see, did we see the same fingerprint someplace else? So there's no vulnerability unless you happen to have a match in both places. And so it's a similar thing with Open Graph. Vulnerabilities only exist because of the relationship between two devices in a certain way and a certain connectivity between them. It's interesting. I mean, so I think the thing that we really try to highlight in run zero is what do you not find through other visibility, other tools? What are the things that we can identify about network segmentation, multi-home connectivity, inter-credential relationships that you're not going to see someplace else? And we felt like, playing with Bloodhound is a really great way to show that stuff off. And then we'd love to get, go the other direction, import Bloodhound data into run zero. So now you're overlaying your Active Directory with your run zero stuff, vice versa. We already import your LDAP and AD and your Enter ID today. So we have some of that data today, but I think we're going to meet in the middle someplace. We feel like we'll have a great way to make Bloodhound users' lives much easier, and also a way to make our users' lives much easier by pulling in Bloodhound data. And this is just a great kind of, community pool to play in the meantime.
Now, look, I do actually want to talk to you about AI a little, right? Because I feel like there are certain services and products that are kind of at risk from AI more than others. I feel like yours less so, actually, because an AI agent just isn't going to immediately be able to do what run zero does. I can see, though, that run zero would be a tremendously useful product for agentic platforms to use. I just wondered how you're thinking about all of that, right? Are you trying to set run zero up as something that's very AI friendly? Are you trying to build query builders for your product as well? So instead of people having to actually query it using some sort of, structured query language, you can just get them to use natural language. Where are you at in the whole AI thing? Because I haven't seen much from you guys at the moment, and I'm guessing there's a reason.
Yeah, we're pretty quiet about it. We use a bunch of AI stuff right now to help us identify vulnerabilities before they make the news. So before you cover it in Risky Biz News, before they show up in Bleeping Computer, we have stuff scraping all the socials, looking at release notes, flagging stuff to us that we can help our customers get ahead of it really quickly. And that's a friend of the show's that we've been working with him and his company to do that. I don't want to name drop him here, but that's all AI based. We also use some AI stuff to help us find more references, do enrichment. And then we have an MCP server in run zero, so you can hook it up to Claude and do whatever you want to do with run zero, including running new scans, pulling data, cross-referencing stuff, all directly through your tool of choice through MCP.
Do you have some people operating AI platforms who are already using your MCP server?
Yeah,
because I'd imagine that would be very popular, right?
Yeah, a lot of folks will plug us into either their Tines workflow through MCP or pull us into nearly anything else. Claude for reporting. We have other folks who plug directly into Power BI and then hook that into whatever Microsoft's Copilot type thing is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just funny, right? Because everyone's shipping an MCP server, and like Run Zero is the only one that I can think of where I'm like, no, it actually definitely makes sense for them to have an MCP server, right? Where it's not always clear. People are just, shipping them anyway. But yours actually makes sense.
Yeah, we hope to like not just give you data, but help you take actual actions, like actually do things in the product from the MCP. That's the part that we've been shipping incrementally here. So we're going to build natural language search. That's an easy thing. It's kind of been in the works for a while. What we've really been thinking more about the AI side is like, we're hard to replace there because we provide data you don't get from anything else. You can't synthesize your way to, the data we provide about network assets or some of the correlation.
No, you can't infer your way to the sort of information that you're capturing. Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, kind of goal for Run Zero since day one is we need to be a primary source of data. We're not just going to aggregate stuff. We need to be telling you things you didn't know before. Otherwise, what's the point? We don't want to just sell your data back to you. So going forward with AI, we feel like there's some really cool things we can be doing. Like we already have some things that are not AI based, but do very similar, like autonomous network discovery. We have automatic asset. Like we'll scrape your entire private RFC 1918 space, put it all together, and show you the big fancy map. Building some more AI support around that so that it's predicting which offsets and which octets to go after next. It's basically using some internal learning to figure out, how can I do this thing more efficiently, and then highlight and continuously scan the things that are more at risk. That'd be a good example of that. Like, let's increase the frequency of testing for the things that are most likely to be exposed, and let's hold off on things that just don't change very much over time. So that's another area we're looking at for building AI into. The challenge, of course, is we ship a self-hosted product that runs in a skiff, and we also ship a SaaS product that runs at Amazon, and everything in between, right? So whatever we build, it has to work just fine everywhere else. And so, for the AI stuff, we need the ability for the customer to plug in their own local LLM or just turn it off entirely. And for the cloud side, we need to make sure that our data never leaves that particular region, country, et cetera. So we're a little bit hamstrung in that we're not willing just to go through all of our customer data into Anthropic, and that kind of sets us apart from many other people in the space. Like, we actually care about where your customer data goes and where it ends up. And that means we take a little bit of a slower path to get there.
Yeah, it is. There's a fair bit of YOLO out there, which I'm sure there's going to be some interesting headlines for us to cover in the news over the next few years because of that. One thing we should just touch on before we go, like, you've done this big kind of pivot really to being a vulnerability scanning platform, right? Like a risk exposure platform. You're currently doing a fair bit of work on the front end, right, to sort of reflect that change.
Yeah, a while back we redid the product UX, so it was really designed to help you bring data in from as many places as you can, like your passive network discovery, active scans, your connections, and it really kind of walked you through that process, gave you the dashboard, told you how all that worked. We've since then been adding a ton of features around vulnerability detection, exposure management, vulnerability inference, rapid response, risk dashboards, but none of that is like turnkey today. You have to kind of know what to do to set it up. So we're really looking at doing a refresh where as you log in, you're getting a list of like, here's, my external attack surface management. Here's the things I want to plug into it. I want to watch that stuff, ask the customer what EDR they use, make sure that security control is properly represented everywhere, really kind of learn from the customer what goals they have as we do the onboarding, and then be able to show them, that really quick hit list of here's what's going according to plan, here's unexpected new stuff that's come up, and here's what's falling behind.
All right, HD Moore, thank you so much for joining us for a chat. It's always a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thanks, Patrick.
That was HD Moore from Run Zero there. Big thanks to him for that. And I've dropped a couple of links into this week's show notes, both into the Bloodhound Open Graph stuff and what they're doing around AI. So you can click through and have a bit of a read if that interests you. But that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.